The English poet William Cowper once said, "Variety's the very spice of life that gives it all its flavor." And you know what? I agree with Mr. Cooper, as his surname is an old spelling of Cooper, a person trained to make barrels. That makes him inherently trustworthy. And without variety, we might never have learned about the tribe that similarly built up a civilization based around barrels, and bananas, and sick beats. So let me preface this all by saying, hey, I like the Tiki Tak Tribe. I know that in the previous installment of DKU Lore Tour, I maintained that grotesque stubbornness kept Nintendo from using the Kremling crew during this era of the Donkey Kong franchise. And look, I stand by that. I also believe that the Kremlings are the most interesting and well-suited antagonist for the Kongs. But that's not me saying that I don't enjoy the Kong's other villains. I'd always dreamed of the DK crew having a large, robust rogues gallery, a rotating assortment of baddies to keep things fresh and interesting. Sometimes the Batman can't just punch out the Joker, and his body screams out for a change. The contention comes from when you've got a scarcity of titles in a video game series, 1 or 2 games every decade, that you generally want to catch up with old favorites as much as you possibly can. Life is short. Time is fleeting. But if we could return to something approaching the status quo of the 1990s, or even the buyout era, where we'd have one major platformer every generation, plus a bevy of supporting titles, and maybe even both 2D Donkey Kong Country games and 3D platformers in the mix? Well, I wouldn't want K. Rool or the Kremlings to appear in every single adventure. And so even with the extremely limited entries in Donkey Kong's travelogue since 2010, I think there's plenty to appreciate about the foes he faced off with during that time, especially with what they bring to the lore of the Donkey Kong universe. And the Tiki Tak Tribe were the missing pieces for several holes in what we knew and could ascertain about the history of Donkey Kong Island. The Tiki Tak Tribe was created by Retro Studios for 2010's Donkey Kong Country Returns. A bunch of shifty-eyed musical miscreants, to quote Cranky Kong in the instruction manual, serving as the antagonist of the game. The first time the Kongs faced off against a foe in the Donkey Kong Country series that wasn't the Kremling crew. The majority of the Tikis appear as instruments, mostly drums, but also a kalimba, maracas, a gong, a banjo, pan flutes, the xylophone, and an accordion. Spirits physically possessing musical mechanisms. Now, this is somewhat of an extreme deviation from what a tiki is in real-world mythology, just in case you were under the impression that there are always percussion instruments swaying the opinions of crustacean sailors. Nope. Traditionally, tiki derives from the creation story of the Maori of New Zealand, in which tiki was the first man. Wooden or stone sculptures honoring this protoplast became customary among the Maori, especially with the ornamental haitiki that are worn as pendants. And from there, the custom spread throughout the various cultures of what comprises the Polynesian Triangle of the Pacific Ocean, stretching from New Zealand, Easter Island, and Hawaii. While tiki is a specific terminology related to the carvings of New Zealand, with the sculptures in other areas of Polynesia going by different names, it became a universal catch-all when tiki culture first exploded in the United States in the late 1940s. However, tiki culture's origin lies more than a decade earlier in the 1930s, shortly after the end of Prohibition. Yes, like so much of the Donkey Kong universe, the Tiki Tak Tribe can be explained by folks getting shit-faced drunk. Let us know in the comments if you're watching this wasted on Mai Tais. Dom the Beachcomber was a trendy restaurant and bar in Hollywood, run by a former rum runner who amalgamated the imagery of the Pacific Islands into what is now a familiar pastiche, complete with brightly colored, exotic alcoholic beverages. It opened in 1933 and would go on to directly inspire other popular bars and eateries, such as Trader Vic's and the Luau, all of which helped promulgate a romanticized, albeit intermingled, view of the South Seas, one which was also buoyed by the early Hollywood films of the era. The craze would be put on hold with the outbreak of World War II and the United States' entrance into the global conflict, but following the conclusion of the war in 1945, those who served in the Pacific Theater would come home with their own glamorized remembrances of their time overseas. It was in 1947 that the Kon-Tiki expedition to the Polynesian Islands first popularized the term tiki outside of New Zealand, and the golden age of tiki culture officially began. Tiki bars and decor were in vogue throughout the 1950s and became even more of a mainstay of tacky Americana when Hawaii was admitted to the Union as the 50th state in 1959. And yes, tiki culture is a gross simplification of the diverse beliefs, customs, and traditions of the Polynesian diaspora, tinged with all manner of prickly notions like cultural appropriation and even colonialism. Now folks, I'm just a simple Donkey Kong country journalist, but I know enough to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this kind of thing anymore. I feel like I also must stress once again that tiki is not the universal term outside of the Maori people and their descendants, with one or two exceptions, and it's only applied universally through the artificial homogenation of tiki culture. But generally speaking, the roots of tiki culture seem to have been planted in good faith, a misguided attempt at celebrating and paying tribute to a collection of cultures that outsiders didn't really understand. And it's still mostly warmly remembered as a campy bit of nostalgia today, a kitschy refuge for those with wanderlust and the desire to set sail to an island paradise. All of this to say, the Donkey Kong series Tiki Tak Tribe is not directly based on any actual civilization or real-world mythology. In fact, along with the Pacific Island vibes, there's even some influence of First Nations and indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, as well as Mesoamerica thrown into the melting pot. There's also a sprinkling of African flavor, apropos for this Donkey Kong stew. And while we can perhaps draw some correlation between the original Maori Tiki tales and the Tiki Tak Tribe, it's doubtful that any of it was intentional. Not that it won't stop me from bringing it up. In the world of the Donkey Kong universe, we, the audience, didn't know of the Tiki Tak Tribe until Donkey Kong Country Returns. But I'd posit that their influence was felt all across Donkey Kong Island, in both small and massive ways, in the previous Donkey Kong Country games, the Donkey Kong Land trilogy, Donkey Kong 64, and even titles like Mario Party, Donkey Konga, and, say it with me, Mario Kart Arcade GP. But to understand how they were the retroactive continuity behind the very origins of Kong society, we need to first understand where they themselves came from. And it all starts with Tiki Tong. Tiki Tong is their leader, a demigod from an alternate dimension who came to the future Donkey Kong Island to rule. A lot of this is gathered from the subtext of Donkey Kong Country Returns and its endgame, a journey into a long-lost Golden Temple. At the beginning of Returns, Donkey Kong Island's volcanic core, itself first alluded to way back in the Rare era, with lava seen in or near Chimp Caverns in both Donkey Kong 64 and the Game Boy Advance remake of Donkey Kong Country, erupted, blowing through what was once Gorilla Glacier and unleashing the Tiki Tak Tribe from the slag stockade they were imprisoned in. The Tiki immediately get to work brainwashing the wildlife of DK Island, before making off with Donkey Kong's massive banana horde. The brainwashing, which is implied to have extended beyond the giraffes, elephants, zebras, and squirrels we see in the opening cinematic, to all of the native wild species on Donkey Kong Island, including those specifically revered in the past, like these unshaved testicles, was carried out by the high priest of the Tiki Tak Tribe, most infamously Kalimba. Why were the Tiki Tak Tribe stealing Donkey Kong's bananas? Well, we get a better understanding of it much later in the game. In the hollowed out ruins of the Kremlings' former factory, a hypnotized giant chicken, who the Tikis have designated the rank of Colonel Pluck, because they're absolute maniacs like that, mashes up the bananas a la I Love Lucy to use in an alchemy ritual that seems to possess the hollowed out tiki shells, bringing to life new members of the tribe and replenishing their ranks beyond those who merely escaped the volcano. And while the metaphysical properties of bananas from the DK Isles are not the topic at hand, or hands. No, I'll do it later, okay? I'm tired. I'm so tired right now. I don't want to do it right now. Are they truly new Tikis being created here? Or are they the souls of Tiki Tak Tribe members long departed? Just as studying the remains of the Kremlin-built temples in the original Donkey Kong Country told us an entire history of the Kremlantis Empire, so too can the ruins seen throughout Donkey Kong Country Returns inform us about the ancient past of the Tiki Tak Tribe. Unlike the temples on Donkey Kong Island seen in Country and Land, the Returns remnants are definitely of Kong origin, including what's either prophetic visions of the then future to come, or evidence that the first men's warehouse existed on Donkey Kong Island centuries ago.
He was carrying a tie when he came in, looking a little sheepish. After all, he appeared to be a man who would be more comfortable around construction sites than clothing stores.
But a clear link from the basic temples seen in World 3 to the olden days of the Tiki Tak Tribe, before they were cast into the molten fires of the island, exist within the special K-levels, or key temples, found throughout every world of Returns. The key temples are all locked Tiki Tak Tribe shrines, housing the magical rare orbs. Collecting all 8 rare orbs unlocks the primary house of worship for the Tiki Tak faith, the Golden Temple. Now, just taking a cursory glance at the key temples and how their aesthetics align with the ruins seen elsewhere in the game, gives a strong suggestion that the Tiki Tak Tribe aren't just a band of sentient instruments, but are actually ancient Kongs themselves, their souls either still clinging to the instruments they once used in life, or forcibly brought back from the netherworld to possess drums and masks, enchanted through banana alchemy. Uncovering this hidden truth of the Tiki Tak Tribe is like the Rosetta Stone of Donkey Kong Island. All of a sudden, the entire history of the Kongs makes sense. After all, how did the apes and monkeys shake off the Kremlantian stranglehold on their native island? Through the power of Tiki Tong. Tiki Tong crossing the dimensional barrier and suddenly arriving on the Simian-populated island of antiquity would have no doubt left the apes and monkeys in awe and reverence. They'd worship him as their god, especially if, similar to the way Tani, the god of forest, created Tiki the first man, Tong gifted the primates with the divine spark, the boost of human-like intelligence and speech capacity that turned them into the Kongs we know today. And perhaps Tiki Tong's influence was also felt in the South Pacific at some point. Or maybe he was merely appropriating the culture, like restaurateurs of the 1930s. After all, this isn't the first time we've seen demigods touch the denizens of the Donkey Kong universe, while cloaking themselves in the vague trappings of human culture. Now, the Tiki god being named Tong could be a reference to the island country of Tonga, short for Whakatonga, a word defined as southwards in several Polynesian dialects. Tong is also a Chinese word meaning gathering place, and Tiki Tong certainly brought the Kongs together, you know? Especially when you consider that, in-universe, Kong is likely meant to be a derivative of Tong. We already know that Kong is simply a clan designation for the intelligent apes and monkeys of the rare archipelago. This is why Kong has never been an indication of a literal family. Yes, some Kongs are related, others are not. And if it wasn't before, this should have been plainly transparent by the time we got to the likes of Karate Kong. And also the fact that Donkey Kong is romantically paired with Candy Kong, and Dixie Kong is dating Diddy Kong, and nobody there is married, nor are the Kongs the stars of any seasonal coffee advertisements. Hot, uncomfortably sexy coffee advertisements. Yeah, that's it. That's the good grind.
Dum dee dum dee dee dum dee dum doo dum doo dum dee dee.
Now, in our boring, bland, real world, Kong is still a name long associated with simian kind. It's an actual East Asian surname. The philosopher Confucius was even born Kong Kui, and it was applied to Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, from the famed 1592 Chinese novel Journey to the West. And of course there's King Kong, whose name was actually derived as a portmanteau of the historic Konga region and people of Africa, and the Komodo dragon, which was referred to in the book Dragon Lizards of Komodo as the King of Komodo. Disparate cultures, peoples, and ideas all came together to marry the Kong name with primates. And so when looking for a concise explanation for the surname in the Donkey Kong universe, having it be taken as an honorific for historic followers of Tiki Tong is as simple and elegant solution as any. It's like taking Christian as a name, or Cooper, if you're really into barrels. So if the power of Tiki Tong, manifested through the first Kongs forming the Tiki Tak Tribe, drove out the Kremlings of antiquity from Donkey Kong Island and reclaimed it for its native inhabitants, that explains why we also see temples of Kong origin, beginning as early as the original Mario Party. In DK's Jungle Adventure, Donkey Kong competed against his Mario Kart 64 rivals to find a so-called great treasure in these mysterious ruins. The treasure, it turned out, was a banana bunch made out of solid gold. This was the first in-game appearance of the golden bananas, ancient relics that seemed to somehow have actual banana fruit within. Although they first appeared in this promotional render for Donkey Kong Country. But it wasn't until after Mario Party that Donkey Kong seemingly went back and found the rest, creating the golden banana horde that we saw later that year in Donkey Kong 64. The golden bananas would logically be something akin to holy relics of the Tiki Tak Tribe, creating an homage to the prime golden banana, housed in the Golden Temple. Consuming the flesh of the prime golden banana is the only way to traverse the dimensional barrier back into Tiki Tong's home realm, itself a world that seems to be centered around the idol tree of enormous fruit. A celestial wonderland that would have no doubt loomed large in the spirituality of the early Kongs. It looms so large that Donkey Kong's fashion sense may have originated with the native koala species, koalis.
You're gonna like the way you look. I guarantee it.
As mentioned, the entrance to the Golden Temple was locked behind the power of the rare orbs, themselves stored away within the key temples scattered around Donkey Kong Island. The only way to open up a key temple? The Kong letters, or Kong letters, artifacts imbued with low-level magical properties. Kong letters were crafted with abundance, and their propensity in popping up across the rare archipelago into the modern day means that they could also be retrofitted for other purposes, such as obtaining more life balloons, or even being reconfigured to act as makeshift save points. These machines can also just solidify them into stable floating footsteps, because the infrastructure of Big Ape City is just that terrible. And I thought public transportation in Los Angeles was rough. If the souls of the Tiki priest all possessing instruments didn't give it away, the Tiki Tak Tribe revered music and incorporated it into every aspect of their life and afterlife, a tradition that was passed down even long after Kong Society cast out the cult and claimed their independence. Using it to tame the wildlife of the DK Isles, it's possible one of the principal instruments in this process may in fact have been the DK bongos. Yes, the infamous Pandora's box that unleashed the Donkey Konga series. Donkey and Diddy found them washed ashore the Congo beach, and DK's ignorance surrounding them, despite, using bongos 5 years earlier, as well as Lorehound Cranky knowing exactly where they came from, suggests there's something special about this specific set of bongos. When you clap, they glow. What's that? Hawaiian noises? When you bang in on these bongos like a chimpanzee, it even generates banana coins. More alchemy, and possibly the origin of what became Donkey Kong Island's legal tender. That little funky got his own jet airplane. That little funky, he's a millionaire. While it's true that we have a clearer picture of the Kremlantis Empire's reach, we do know that the Tiki Tak Tribe's influence was also felt across the greater Rare Archipelago. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze showed us that screaming pillars, the tribe's bellowing jungle sentries, were installed as far north as the island of Bright Savannah, and key temples, which in this instance had been taken over and repurposed as Snowmad treasure vaults and a place to house their mystical ruins, were built all the way up into the lost mangroves. The jungle ruins seen in the northern Kremisphere's Chaos Core and Krakatoa might indicate historical Tiki Tak Tribe activity, since they would have likely allied with the Bears in driving out the Kremlings' occupation of the Kremisphere. And that in and of itself would go a long way toward explaining the world of Pacifica, exclusively seen in the Game Boy Advance remake of Donkey Kong Country 3. A direct counterpoint to Kremlantis, itself a bizarro Kremlin mirror version of Atlantis, Pacifica may have been a Tiki Tak Tribe, Bear, Unity City during the war. The presence of the Pacific Island-themed tikis would explain Pacifica's odd name, given that the Northern Hemisphere itself is heavily based on Central Europe, and so much of the rare archipelago is centered around the maritime mythology of the Atlantic Ocean. Pacifica is also Spanish for peaceful, and I'm sure the Northern Hemisphere was after they drove out the Kremlings. For a little while at least. But like all great and powerful forces, the Tiki Tak Tribe was, in truth, no less barbaric and ruthless than the Kremlantians they helped push back. After all, forcefully keeping the wildlife under your thrall is not the same as living in harmony with nature. Being one with the forest is the whole message of Donkey Kong, and specifically Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, with the movements DK made referred to as beats, the rhythm of the jungle. Jungle Beat. And eventually, the historical Kongs realized this. They bristled against Tiki Tong's rule, and like Michael Stipe, they lost their religion. The rebellion, which would have seen Tiki Tong and the High Priest cast into the fires of Donkey Kong Island, suppressed but not fully extinguished, is, well, sort of supported by the creative minds behind Donkey Kong, if this tweet is any indication.
I see that you is creator of Kong Island. I have a doubt. This island, born by Tiki Tong's volcanic power during prehistoric times. It was inhabited by Tikis and was taken over by the Kongs in a rebellion?
LOL! Yes, indeed! Can you all believe next year is the 30th anniversary?
Adrian Smith, formerly of Rare, did help design Donkey Kong Island. And even though he had no correspondence or coordination with Retro Studios when they created the Tiki Tak Tribe, I'd say it counts. After all, LOL, yes indeed. The man decrees it, and shouldn't we listen to the word of God? Oh, I'm a hypocrite, aren't I? Bears. Beats. Bananas. The echoes of the Tiki Tak Tribe reverberate across modern Kong society. That their evil gave rise to something widely held today as good, noble, and true is, well, really no different than most human civilizations or cultures with a long ancestral footprint. And while another English poet, an obscure Donkey Kong universe character by the name of William Shakespeare, once said that the sins of the father are to be laid upon the children. The fact that the Kongs were able to rise up from their ethically murky beginnings and even reject Tiki Tong's return, moving heaven and earth to prevent his despotic rule from once again darkening Donkey Kong Island, shows us that we are not our ancestors. We're in control of our own destinies. And sure, the weaker among us may defend the dubious actions of our forebears and forebrothers bear, and double down on their double trouble. But I believe the reason for existence, if there is any, is the constant strive to better, to improve, to rise up and above what came before, until we individually and collectively achieve enlightenment. We can't just rely on a divine hand coming down from on high and giving us all the answers. We've got to do the hard work ourselves, to look at what came before, retain what's worth holding on to, and drop the damn moon on the rest. Teach your children well. Or else they'll wind up like this.